Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today grew up in Chicago, where her first job was tending the corner newsstand for a penny a minute, while Carl, the newspaper man, ate his lunch at Steinway's drugstore. Her debut novel, Like a Complete Unknown, was published in March 2022. She graduated from Kenyon College and Simmons College Graduate School of Library and Information Science in Boston, and now lives in Northern California with her husband and yard dragon. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Anara Guard.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Anara, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, I think the answer is the same as probably many of your guests, that other things in life got in the way. Needing to earn a living, raising children, allowing things to get in the way, and not always making my writing a priority. And then I came from a background of writing poetry and short stories. So writing a novel was a big challenge. I had a lot to learn about how to extend the characters and how to extend the plot. So it took me a lot longer to write than I thought it would. And I am really, really hoping that the next novel doesn't take anywhere near that long.
I think that is a benefit after the first. I think we write more quickly.
Good. Glad to hear it. So far, so good.
Once you wrote that manuscript, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent or decide to use a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
Well, first I did search for an agent and found that to be a very grueling process. You have to have patience of a saint and really thick skin. I think I could have dealt with the criticism better than the just not hearing. So I did end up going with a small press here in Sacramento, not hybrid, just plain small press, and I'm glad that I did.
I'm the same way. I'm with the small press, and I really love having a partner in the business. And, there's some shortcomings, but there's shortcomings with the big five as well. And I think the small presses are really a great way to go. And as authors these days, we have so many options. So some people will go with the small press this time, a hybrid next time. They'll self-publish a book. We can do anything we want these days.
That's right.
What was your inspiration for your book?
The first part was noticing that the period of the late 60s and early 70s was, the further we get away from it, I felt like it was being Disneyified in a way, that the same kind of stories were being told, as if it was all about hippies, that only young people were involved in the anti-war movement, that everything happened in San Francisco or New York. So I wanted to set this story in Chicago with a strong, gritty labor movement and the city of big shoulders where I grew up. And I also wanted to show that the anti-war movement had the involvement of people of all ages, that there were nuns and priests and doctors and ministers and housewives and parents of young men who were drafted, all were involved. We wouldn't have ended the war in Vietnam without that kind of approach. And I also was inspired by having met a young woman at one point in my life who had no plans after high school other than to clean offices at night with her immigrant mother. And that was all the ambitions that her parents had for her. So I wanted to write a different ending for her life than maybe the one that she really did have. And that inspired my character of Katja Warszawski.
Well, that's a wonderful inspiration. Then how did you determine your plot?
Oh, it came bit by bit. For a while, I wasn't sure what to do with a couple of the characters, but I liked the idea of Katja, this young runaway, coming into this sad widowed doctor's life and being a catalyst for change, that just her appearance in his life upends it as he decides to search for her, because she appears and then she disappears. And he thinks that she doesn't know, she's too naive to know what she's doing out there in the streets of Chicago. And he then has to become brave and venture out into those same streets to try to find her.
Do you write every day? Have you been one of those writers who keeps a journal?
I do keep a journal. I write almost every day, not every day. There are days when other things just get in the way, but I try to either work on this next novel or poetry or some short stories pretty much every day, depending on what's inspiring me that particular day or what I know is on the horizon that I can accomplish in the time that I have.
I've heard from so many of us who have taken those journals that they've written since childhood and have turned them into memoirs. So that's what I always tell people. If you want to start writing, just keep a journal.
And it's a wonderful way to hone your skills as well. You know, you can privately experiment. You can make observations about the world around you. And it's easy to fool yourself into thinking, oh, I'll remember what it's like to raise toddlers. Not really. Not unless you write it down somehow. And that's hard to find the time when you have toddlers.
Yes. You know, you have to nap when they nap.
Or write when they nap.
Exactly.
Those are the choices.
Yes. What does your title mean?
It comes from a Bob Dylan song and the lyrics of, you know, how does it feel to be on your own, like a rolling stone, like a complete unknown? And throughout every chapter has a musical reference that all come from that period of time, 1969 to 1970. And I was hoping that those references either will bring up the soundtrack in your mind if you came up during those years, and if not, the words will still have some meaning and relate to what happens in that chapter.
Well, when you said that, they immediately came back to me. So, you know, there are a lot of Beatles songs that I know for sure, and, you know, things that I forget from yesterday, but I can remember a song from 1972.
Yes. Yes. And there's a Beatles reference in there too.
Well, you know, we writers like to write. We don't like to promote ourselves very well, and that seems to be a sticking point for most of us. Have you found any publicity that's worked for you in promoting this book?
I think for me, the number one that helped was the cover. I think a cover and a beautifully designed cover is so important that the cover alone opened a lot of doors for me. People recognized it wasn't self-published by the cover alone. It wasn't a copycat cover. So I think that was helpful, that as I reached out to bookstores or to review sites, simply seeing that cover helped them know that this wasn't just another historical novel, very similar, you know, that standard image of the woman with her back to the camera and her head cut off in some period dress. That's great. It lets your readers know what to expect, but it doesn't really help you stand out from others. So for me, that's where it started, was with the cover itself.
And how did you find your cover artist? Did your publisher help do that, or were you given free rein to choose your own cover?
a bit of each, and I found him through Readsy, which is a good site for finding professional editors, copy editors, cover designers, and so forth. So that's where he was found. Yeah.
And you just chose the style that he was creating that you liked, and then y'all worked together to create the cover?
Yeah, we had some back and forth. I said some parameters of what I was interested in and not interested in. And it didn't take terribly many rounds to settle on the design.
Well, it's a lovely cover.
Thank you. And he was great at the image on the suitcase that she's holding is from the Chicago stockyards, which come up in the story. So he found that real photograph and modified it as needed.
I kind of did my first book the same way, in that there's a suitcase sitting beside a young woman standing there, and in the '60s garb, to try to bring back those images in your mind when she was having to go to a maternity home.
Yes, yes.
What about any specific books or seminars or writing retreats or groups that you can share that improved your writing journey?
I've been to two of the week-long communities, to Breadloaf and to the Community of Writers here in California. And both were helpful, perhaps more with the networking and listening than with the actual critiquing of the manuscript that I submitted. In both cases, I ended up being the first one who was critiqued just by chance, which isn't really helpful because people need to do it for a day or two to get their legs under them and to figure out what they want to say and to get a little more adept at it. So I felt like I would have benefited more if I'd been day 3, but they both were still wonderful opportunities to meet people and to go to the workshops and the readings, not just the critique sessions. I have a writing partner now who I meet with on Zoom regularly, who has published several novels or have had them published. She's more experienced than I am in some ways, and so that's very helpful and encouraging to have that kind of relationship.
I think that is important. And sometimes we meet people to be partners or critique groups or beta readers at these conferences and writing retreats. I love the writing retreats where there's instruction in the morning. You'll have a class or a critique group, and then in the afternoon and night you can just write furiously and get so much done without having to fix meals for anybody or clean your house or do anything that's going to distract you from the writing. So that's what I love about writing retreats.
Yes, and at another conference, Gold Country Writers here in California, I met a writer who had just retired from being a physician, and his father had been an OBGYN in the time period that the novel was set. So I sent him the manuscript, and he checked it for, since one of the characters is a doctor, to make sure that I had the appendix on the right side and, used the equipment appropriately. And that was really helpful. And I was grateful to have met him.
Did your small press have an editor that they assigned to you? Did you do a lot of editing before you got it to a professional editor? How did you handle your editing process?
Yeah, and in some ways, looking back, I think I maybe did too much editing. And that's part of what took so long, that I was changing tense and I was changing pronoun point of view and not settling. So I don't know if I'd really call that editing. Maybe it was just messing around. but yes, I finally, with the press, had 2 good editors. And that was really helpful to get fresh points of view. Sometimes a little shocking or a little bit of like cold water. that maybe something didn't work that I thought did or was self-explanatory, but it's really helpful to get those fresh eyes on your pages.
Yes, and I too became hooked on the editing process or editors, and they would all tell me something different. So I would, make all of these changes and kill those darlings. And I know they say that writing is rewriting, but I did take a long time with a lot of editors.
And you have to bear in mind that your book will not be for every reader, and that editor may not represent your ideal readers. So you really have to learn to have your own good judgment about, yeah, you might think that, but I'm not making that change.
Yeah, you do get to that point because, when you're a newbie, you think that you should take everybody's advice, but, you do have to know what your story is all about and your characters, and nobody knows that better than you. So you do have to stand up for them sometimes.
That's right. That's right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the passage you've brought to share today and then read so we can hear your tone and voice in the book?
Okay. I chose early on. I've already indicated that one of the main characters is Katja. And at this point in the first chapter, Katja has, maybe the second chapter, has decided to run away from home, that she will not settle for this narrow life that her parents want for her. She's just a few days away from her 16th birthday. So she's pretty young, and she's had a sheltered environment, living in one neighborhood in Chicago and not really leaving that neighborhood. It's primarily a neighborhood of immigrants from Poland. And so she is naively getting ready to leave home, and we'll see what happens. As water gurgled down the drain, her resolve weakened. It wasn't too late yet. No one need know that she had flirted with the temptation to leave. She could still change her mind, strip off the extra clothes she was wearing, and go to school like always. But always would only last for 5 days, just 5 more art classes, a handful of lunch periods in the company of chattering teenagers. And on her birthday, there would be no celebrating, for then Katja must become a night creature and sleep through the hours of light like an owl. No, like a more pitiful creature, the owl's prey. She tiptoed around her bedroom, touching each beloved object, her fingertips kissing the lampshade, the scuffed wooden desk where she pretended to do her homework while drawing pictures instead, the daisy print poster, her blue bathrobe hanging from its hook. Goodbye, Nancy Drew books. Farewell, nubby pink bedspread. The front door opened and closed. Her father's footsteps faded down the walk. Quick, while Ma still slept, slide the window up. She wrestled the heavy suitcase through the opening and watched it drop into the flower bed below, crushing Ma's asters and chrysanthemums beneath its guilty load. The shock of cold air against her cheeks reawakened her doubts. Where would she go? She needed a city map and money, much more than was in her pocket. She wished she had agreed to babysit last weekend for the neighbors. As if in a dream, she floated down the stairs despite her bulky layers of wool and corduroy. A stranger inhabited her body now. Another girl balanced on the step stool and reached into the cupboard above the stove where her mother's household money was kept, beneath the heavy lid of a porcelain soup tureen brought out only on holidays and special occasions. My birthday money a little ahead of time, she told herself. Coins bit into someone else's palm. Heat spread from the stolen bills into her fingers and up her arm, threatening to set her on fire. She must leave now, before Ma woke. If her mother saw her face, all would be lost. Up to her room to scrawl a quick note and tuck it beneath her pillow, where Ma would not find it until late in the afternoon after she failed to return from school. She wrote, Don't worry. I'll be fine. I'm going to become an artist. Katja.
That's lovely. That's so lovely. All your descriptions. Guilty load. I love that phrase.
Thank you.
Do you Google yourself or read reviews? If so, how do you deal with the bad or the good ones?
Oh, I very rarely Google myself. Maybe I should do it more often. I do read reviews, though I tend to stay away from Goodreads. Um, I reviewed a book somewhat negatively once on Goodreads, and that review has been liked and read more than any of the positive ones that I have posted. And that taught me that the negative was more attractive to people than the positive. So I figured I don't need to see if somebody doesn't like it. And I remind myself it's not for everybody. Um, and I think that's the main mantra that I tell myself. Not everyone's going to love your book, and that's fine. If enough people like it and enjoy it and recommend it to others, I hope they finish it. But if they don't finish it, that's okay too.
That's a good attitude to have because there's some very critical reviewers out there and maybe some bots, I think, that give us poor reviews without having even read the book.
Yes. Yes. What's more meaningful to me is hearing from readers directly, to get an email or a letter, or to speak to a book group and be able to hear from people who actually read the book. Even if they didn't always agree, some of them have said that they hated this or that character, or they really didn't like this, or they wished I had ended it differently. And that's all great. It means they were very engaged.
Exactly. Those are strong emotions about something that you wrote. That's always great. And I love different character names. How did you choose yours?
Well, with Katja, I knew that coming from a Polish family, that I would need Polish names, so Katja Warszawski. Um, I changed the doctor's name many times. At one point, I had a name for him, and after using that name for months, I realized it was the name of a doctor character on a television show. So that's where it had come from, and I hadn't realized it, so I had to get rid of that. There's another young street youth who, for a long time, I had named him Red. He, of course, wouldn't use his real name. He would come up with a street name, and he chose Red because he did not have red hair, figuring that would like throw off the trail of anybody, cops or whatever. But it was confusing to the beta readers. They kept expecting him to have red hair. So I got rid of Red, and now his name is Huck, like Huck Finn. And that's worked out almost as well, but it took me a little while to adjust to not calling him Red anymore.
I had the same experience with one of my characters. I named her Claire, and somebody said, "Oh, there's a television series that has a Claire who makes it to the White House." And I said, "Well, I've never even seen that, so it can't even have stuck in my subconscious." But
yes.
I had to change that name as well.
Yeah, sometimes there will be some resonance that we don't know about, and we may have to live with it. But if we can identify it and get rid of it beforehand, that's helpful, so that we don't unknowingly bring in these associations that we didn't want to.
Well, speaking of that, was there anything that you edited out of the book that hit the cutting room floor that didn't make it in?
Yeah. Let's see. I had a whole scene with Huck, and some girl that he met and spent the night with, that I wanted in there just to sort of round out his character, but it didn't go anywhere. It didn't really take us anywhere. So I thought I could get rid of that whole scene and then just try to amplify his character in some other ways. That's one for sure that I can think of. I'm sure that there were others, but that's the main one that I can remember at the moment.
Do you have to do any research for your, did you have to do any research for your book? Did you do that before you began writing or as you go along?
I did some as I went along because it was set during the Vietnam War and a little bit before my time. Um, I needed to know better how young men avoided the draft. And happily, I found a website that was all filled with the memories written by the men themselves of what it was like to go for their physical, whether they passed it or not, whether they did things to themselves to try to not pass the medical exam. For example, one young man was allergic to cats and he locked himself in a room all night with a lot of cats so that he would show up as if he had asthma and they would reject him. There were all kinds of things. So that was really helpful because that was so far out of my own experience. So that was some research that I did. Since it's set in the city where I grew up, I really relied on my memory a lot or looking at old photographs. And when I go back to Chicago to visit, I didn't go back to a couple of places that I knew had changed so much. I didn't want it to overlay my memories with what was there now. So I felt like I walked around the city with double vision, seeing what I remembered and what was there now, and trying to hold on to the memories so that I could continue to write in the way that I remembered it.
Well, that happened to me as well when I was writing my first book because I lived those periods, but you forget what year a song came out or how a specific place looked back then, and you have to kind of jog your memory with an old photo. And doesn't the internet make research so easy for us? Can you imagine going and sitting in a library all day and pulling down books and trying to do your research?
Well, that would be very enjoyable. And I listened to a lot of music, and that helped too to set the mood.
Do you have any other books in you?
I'm working on a second novel right now about sisters, and I have a poetry collection coming out next May from the publisher, The Poetry Box, based in Oregon.
Well, poetry has certainly made a resurgence, hasn't it? And especially among young people.
Yeah, a lot of young people are really into spoken poetry coming out of rap and poetry slams. Um, I do enjoy reading my poetry out loud, but I don't memorize it in the way that a lot of young folks do. But then again, a lot of mine doesn't have that kind of rhythm and rhyme that they rely on. But the poetry collection is called Kansas Reimagined, in which I take the familiar characters in The Wizard of Oz and reimagine them and then keep going and animate everything from the windmill to the sunflowers to the corn, blizzards, cyclones. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's very intriguing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I've just submitted the manuscript this week to the publisher, so I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with the cover and so forth.
What does writing success look like to you personally?
That's a good question. Of course, I think we all have our little secret dreams that Terry Gross is going to interview us on Fresh Air or, that kind of thing. But I think what it has come to mean to me is really the satisfaction of hearing from a reader, that to have someone tell me that they read the book, that they loved it, or how they felt about a character just means everything. It means that I succeeded in some way and that these characters that I birthed and brought to life actually had a life. And that's been, I think that's real success right there. And also then to be able to read a passage and still like it, that's also success.
I agree. And those characters are going to be our legacy and outlive all of us.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah, it's nice to think of them being out in the world.
Yes, I agree with that. I have a good friend who at the end of her novel, she killed all the characters off, and I was so upset. In the afterword, she showed how each one died, and I just didn't want to read that. So I like to think of my characters still living on in some way.
And they never have to age. They're just going to be the same age as they are in the book.
That's right. That's right.
Although at my age, I say that having a long life and growing older is a privilege because not everybody's afforded that privilege.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Every day is precious.
It really is. And this has been a great visit with you to hear about your journey. And always, our last interview question is that our writers are quite unique. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
Yeah, I think in line with what I've been saying, really take a long view. It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the first 6 weeks is all that counts. As you heard, my novel came out 18 months ago from when we're recording this. And I'm still speaking to book clubs. I've got one later this week and hearing from readers and consigning copies to bookstores and promoting it, doing podcasts like this, while also working on the next book. So time is our friend. It's not our enemy. We don't have to have straight out the gate whiz bang success, or it doesn't mean anything, especially if you go with a small press or self-publish or hybrid. You don't have to fall prey to that kind of pressured calendar. So enjoy the ride and take the long view.
That's great advice. And I certainly do think that's the case because I'm discovering books many years after they've been published and loving those. So I think, as we've said, that our books are going to live forever out in the world, and people are going to find them even long after we're gone. So I appreciate you so much being here with us, because there's so many of us who are just beginning our writing journey after the age of 50. I'm interviewing people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s who are writing beautiful work. And I think we can do it the rest of our lives. So I look forward to watching your career. And we appreciate you because now you're counted among our authors over 50.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And if I can add one more word of advice, when you read a book that you love, reach out to that author and tell them.
I certainly agree about that. And reviews are the author's lifeblood. So all of you who listen to this podcast to find your next read, remember that. Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.